on the meeting. So I'm just going to go ahead and add them on Zoom, even though I think they might be on Instagram Live too. I don't know. And we'll just run both, even though that's probably not the best way to do it. I got you on Zoom as well, so I can see you there.
Perfect. Yeah, I see you. I'm going to focus on Instagram Live, and then if things go terribly, we'll go from there.
Yeah. And I'm just going to go ahead and send a message to the people that are on Zoom and say, hey, FYI, we're focusing on Instagram Live, but all right, cool. So yeah, for everybody who's on Zoom, once again, real quick, we are going to be on Instagram Live focusing. So far as questions and answers, we'll have both running just in case, because Instagram Live's been having some trouble. But what do you think? Let's get started.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, I think we've got, looks like we've got 53 people already. So thanks for joining us. This was put together by Rob and I. We were talking on the phone the other day, and everybody's home a little bit more often, or their schedules are a little bit reduced. So we figured we'd get together and just kind of talk a bit, connect, and we're all looking for connection right now. So we'll see how it goes. But I figured we'd start with just kind of talking to each other for a little bit, and then open it up for Q&A. We'll check up Q&A, both Instagram Live. I've got access to both Zoom and Instagram Live. I'm kind of using my phone and computer, which makes it easy. But yeah. How you doing, buddy?
Doing, pretty good. I'd say the big upswings has been enjoying a lot more time home with the kids and my wife. And so I like all of them as people, which is kind of why they're in my life, but I miss them a lot when I travel for consulting work. So on the one side, the lack of consulting work and travel has been really nice to be able to be home and be focused on them. So yeah, been doing pretty good on that side. So
that's good. Yeah, it was interesting when the events started getting canceled. I was looking at it and going like, oh man, I just won 4 weeks of my life back. And I immediately started thinking about like all the food I was going to cook and all the people I was going to hang out with. And then all of a sudden it was like, yeah, you're not going to be able to do any of that. Like there's no flour, there's no chicken, and your friends can't come over. I was like, oh, okay, so we'll have to adapt a little bit there. But it's been a really, really interesting experience.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, so for those who don't know me, I'm Devin. I work in Sacramento for Cropster. I've been at the company for 6 years. I've been at the company since we had just 2 people working, and I worked in Norbert's office, one of the founders. I'm actually currently using the desk that I used as an intern when I started. I like snuck it home right before we had to do work from home. Using like the monitor and setup, I sent a photo to Norbert, and he's like, "Oh, it's like a big like slide down from what we were previously doing." It's still good. Like we've got our team working remote, doing things to keep in good spirits. So like the Austrian team has been awesome in leading us and keeping in good spirits. They've been sending out daily challenges, which we've been featuring on our Instagram page. But it's just been fun. Like not every minute, but like we found ways to make it fun. Out of curiosity, go ahead.
Not great. I'm sitting in a windowsill. This is where so I've got like a storage bench unit with some padding on top, and so currently I sit there. I've been focusing more on making sure that my space in the garage is getting set up. I'm going to post pictures of that later, but getting some ventilation installed, last minute cupping table area, grinder area, get some good water so that I can keep cupping and sample roasting and stuff. So that's been my focus. Eventually I'll try and do something home office oriented here.
Yeah. In Portland, so like I live in California, we shut down pretty much everything. It's full on shelter in place. Is it the same in Oregon?
Yeah, for the most part. Everything except for bare necessities. So thankfully I had extra ventilation and some extra fans and stuff sitting around. So I've just kind of been MacGyvering, cobbling together my setup. So
okay, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you gone into the office at all since, like, how are things working with Nossa Familia right now?
Yeah, well, with Nossa, it's we made the decision early, which was a good decision, despite being difficult, that we on the leadership team should cut back hours immediately and as much as possible. So I'm basically down to like 4 hours a week or less, depending on what workload there is. So if I'm cupping and approving samples or doing some online talks or some education stuff, it's like a weird thing being in the director of coffee position when we have plenty of coffee in our queue. They don't really need me. So they only really need me for the buying and sorting out of coffee when it actually lands. So when the Central Americans and stuff start coming in, I'll probably have a little bit more to do. So I've not been into the office very much, been mostly working from home and working on different projects here and there, chatting with some clients and people that I've known for a while, and working on, I got distracted. So I'm halfway through with my second iteration of my book, and I got distracted with the idea of I really wanted to write something for beginners because I've had a lot of people who are beginning in roasting or friends that are beginning in roasting that really want advice. And so I'm coming out with that first because I just felt a really, really great flow on that. So there should be, hopefully, before the COVID situation is out, I'll have my rough draft ready. So working on that really diligently to have something for just newbies who are getting on the experience. So I've been keeping busy. But yeah, with the Nossa thing, it's weird. We're down to skeleton crew. All the cafes are closed. A lot of us are either furloughed or laid off temporarily, so we'll see. But our big goal is making sure that there's a place for people to come back to. So on the one side, taking care of employees as much as possible by giving them work if we have it that they can fulfill in a safe manner through social distancing in our warehouse and stuff. But even then, making sure that they'll have a business to come back to once everything else dries up. So
so like I'm curious. I do want to come back around to that book because I think we're all interested in that. But like, what are some ways that Nossa has pivoted like during this time? Like we have thousands of roasters who we work with, and we've seen a lot of really awesome situations come out of the turmoil of it. Like, what are you guys doing to survive and thrive through this situation?
We pretty much immediately decided to stop considering rent in the equation when it came to keeping our cafes open. And any of our employees who wanted to not come in for feeling like they were concerned about or felt threatened by being that space. So we basically stopped considering rent, and as long as we could break even on salary for the people we had, we kept them employed for as long as humanly possible. And then when the stay-in-place order kind of came, we realized that it wasn't going to hang on for much longer. So we basically had to let our staff go, and our managers basically kind of voluntarily stepped away first to allow other people to have hours, which was really good on them. And so basically we've been just trying to figure out who's most vulnerable in the sense of like who needs to keep working most, and then people have been prioritizing letting those people work if they need to. And then there's been a lot of help from our HR department, who's been absolutely fabulous in terms of giving people access to different ideas of things they can do to help themselves in terms of filing for unemployment, making sure everybody has all the numbers that they need. So we've been running reports a lot for people in terms of like, hey, here's all of the data you need to file for unemployment, like get what you need, that sort of thing. The delivery drivers, we've been slowly stepping down a little bit here and there and looking for ways we can continue to help. And then on a production side, really pushing online sales. And, thankfully we're in the groceries as well. So grocery store sales have been continuing to go pretty well. So those have been the ways we've been really focusing. And then some of the nonprofits who we for lack of a better term, ghost roast for, like we do the roasting for Central City Concern here in Portland, and they had to shut down their operations. So in order to keep their product moving, we offered to do full production for them instead of just roasting.
Okay.
And so we've switched to basically now doing as much as we can for those people that we're contract roasting with that couldn't have people come in. So just trying to find ways to stay busy and keep going. So
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. It sounds like you guys are doing things right. So that's a really good
fingers
thing to
crossed.
have like at your employ. Yeah, I mean you can never know like what is truly going to have the best impact on people, but you got to react, and it sounds like you reacted fast, which is cool.
One
Um,
of the really funny things that we've always said about our company is, when they say like business is X factor. Have you ever heard that saying
mhm.
before? So for those on the call that haven't, the X factor is supposedly the thing that you're willing to do that nobody else is willing to do to like be an awesome business. And our director of ops has always joked that our X factor is we're willing to lose money. And I think that that's been showcased really well. And like most of the time, the ownership has been thinking more, what can we do for the people that are affected by this, instead of thinking about his own self in that sense. So like simultaneously while this is happening, people are putting together care packages. We're working with other B Corps that we know to put together like food care packages to deliver to employees and stuff like that, just to try and help keep stuff going for people. So yeah, it's interesting. So it's good to work for. I've worked for Nossa for 8 years because it's a good place to work. So it's been good to see how they've been handling things, and hopefully we can continue to do things that are smart.
Oh, that's awesome. I think a lot of people think of you as like the guy who wrote the book, and don't know so much about your operations on day-to-day life, like even which company you work at. So I think like that's a cool insight into who you are and where you work and what the company's like and the culture. So thanks for sharing.
Of
Um,
course.
and on the book side, tell us what you can about like what that could mean, for like a getting started book. There's a lot of home roasting books out there. Like that's how I got my start in coffee. My dad's best friend is a home roaster who roasts on a 2 kilo Ambex, and he gave me this. I don't have it around. I'm trying to remember what the name was. It was so long ago, but he gave me a book. It was like, hey, like check this out.
Is it Kenneth,
Um,
the home
yeah,
roasting revival?
yeah.
Yeah.
So he gave me a copy of that book, and I read through it, and then I had nothing to do with it because I don't roast coffee, and he roasted the coffee for me. So it was like, oh, okay. And then I started at Cropster and felt like I had a good basis. But like, what? It's an old book. What do you feel like you have to add to the new coffee roaster book scene?
Yeah, I mean the approach I'm taking so far, the beginner's book especially is going to be more in line with a manifesto style, where it's just kind of like, here's, I think a lot of people when they get started roasting in the industry, they are often dropped into the position or don't have a lot of time to kind of ramp up into it. And so it's going to be very to the point and talking about everything from sourcing and selecting beans. And it's not necessarily meant to be the scientific journal thing.
Sure. Yeah.
This one is a lot more just straight up my opinions and my advice, from years of experience doing stuff like this. And so it'll be kind of geared in that way. So like, for example, like what are some really good ways to work with importers? Like if you're trying to work with an importer and get started, because if you're just starting roasting, direct trade is not, and this is a little preview, don't do direct trade when you first start roasting. You're going to have a really, really rough time with it more than likely, because there's a lot that you don't know about, right?
Yeah.
So, work with an importer where you can get mixed pallets, and you could get 10 bags on a pallet to minimize your shipping costs, but have 10 different bags of coffee if you wanted, or 6 of your blender and a mixture of everything else. And one of the things people don't think about is that your trader for your importer is trying to sell you coffee. That is their job, and they would like to do their job well. And so them doing their job well sounds like you're helping reward someone for being we think poorly of salesmen a lot of the times. And the reality is a salesperson that is trying to have a good long-term sales relationship with you is actually one of your better allies. And so if a salesperson from an importer that you work with is sending you, or traders we call them sometimes, is sending you samples and you're not giving them feedback on the samples, then you are setting up a situation where they don't know what you want, and they're going to send you a lot of random shit you don't need,
Mm-hmm.
that you're then going to have to sample roast and cup and find out you don't need. So it's going to be a waste of your time. Whereas if you actually communicate with them and say like, hey, like I'm not really into this like super, super funky Sumatran sort of stuff. So never send that my direction again. Or, hey, I really liked this coffee. Or here's, telling them a little bit about your business and what you're trying to do and what you're trying to represent in coffee helps them know how to sell to you better, but it also means it's going to limit the amount of samples that you receive that you have to try and vet and go through and work through.
Yeah.
Pre-approving for you, essentially.
Well, I think it'll also help people to build better relationships with their importer. Like right now, we're hearing stories of the relationships that people felt that they had with their importers, and now we're in this situation, and it's really difficult. But I think like I can look to a few roaster friends who really have had excellent relationships with their importers, where sometimes it's from the beginning and they have an awesome educational platform, or you just get the perfect salesperson. Like that's what we think of when we think of a good importer, but also like good business practices on the roaster side, where you actually are being a good business partner or like a supply chain partner to the importer. Because if you say, hey, I like this coffee, this is what it is, sending your cupping notes, using the words that you would use to describe it, even if it's not the right words, right? Like if I say chocolate and you say raisin, there'd be a little bit of like, but a good salesperson can go, well, Devin thinks that coffee's chocolate. I know a coffee that's like that, and I can send him samples like that.
Yep.
And that's a super important part of building relationships, like just cupping your coffees and putting down your notes and actually sharing that information instead of just going like, well, I got 13 samples and I didn't like any of them. Guess I'm going to go get more samples from someone else. Like that's not how you build a relationship.
Absolutely. And when I first started buying, like I remember one time we had fucking like 50, can you say fuck on Instagram Live? Oh, well, it happened. We had like 50 washed Ethiopian samples to sort through. And it was like, I'm going to spend hours trying to sort through these samples and figure out which one to buy, right? And it's just, yeah, awful. So.
Chris, you see Chris's response?
Yeah, Chris is like,
Chris Kohler, yeah, now you can.
Cut off the transmission, then, fair game. The world is our oyster.
Yeah. But no, this is good. It turns out people did not like your language. They're saying you have a potty mouth.
That's Josh, though. He's just joking.
Yeah, that's true.
But no, so it'll be stuff like that, and just like, hey, you're getting started roasting. Like, here's the no bull crap, how to start roasting and do a somewhat okay job from the get-go sort of thing. So, yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of the focus there. And then the second version of the book is really a recap of everything that I've learned since writing the first book on my not podcast. What would you call it? My Instagram Live with Scott yesterday. We talked about how writing books is challenging because, you put something out there that's now suddenly concrete, and we're all in transit or in a transitive state in the industry when we're learning and growing. So like, one of the things I learned from doing the research that I did with Morten Munchau in Copenhagen on the modulating book was that people don't experience body the same way. And who'd have thunk that, right? Like, body is not a stable concept, even though we all use the exact same words. None of us taste it similarly. And so there's going to be updates like that where it's like, hey, here's things that I've learned since writing. Going to include a hell of a lot of stuff about heat transfer and controlling your roaster and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of what's in progress there.
Cool.
So, yeah. Long-winded answer to your question, so apologies.
No, that's good. Looks like Mason wrote, "What's new with Cropster?" I'm like, Mason, you get our newsletters. Hopefully, you're on our Instagram page. What's new with Cropster? Newest with Cropster would be ships beans, right? So we have an awesome team who cares deeply about our customers, and one of our heads of product, Lisa Grinkle, came up with the idea of, hey, we've been working on integrations with different order platforms, But also, like, we found that a lot of our customers, especially the smaller customers, don't even have like a like a roasted coffee listing platform. And especially going into COVID, we said, hey, let's create like a web shop where people can list it for free. So basically, it's a WooCommerce plugin that you have access to if you're a Cropster customer. And then now we've actually made it where it is available for those who are not Cropster customers. So it's a free online plugin where you can put in your shops. Also, we have it now it's called Get Coffee. So basically, we've taken those shops and we've created a B2C platform where we'll do some advertising and we'll be pushing that out to consumers where they can see it, not unlike Sprudge's #StillRoasting page. But yeah, no, I think it, like, Cropster's doing a lot of really cool stuff. We've got stuff with the roasting intelligence and stuff like that, where Rob's doing testing, or our ambassadors and other beta testers, not just Rob. But yeah, no, like, lots of cool stuff. Definitely sign up for our newsletters if you want to see more things like that.
Can I tell them about the life-size robot that stands beside the roaster? Is that still kind of top secret?
Yeah, I know we don't want to share that yet. That's especially now.
Where's the little thing from Men in Black where just forget?
Yeah, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. I'm out of batteries. Sweet.
I inadvertently put this question up on the bottom of the screen because I don't know how the question thing works, but I've found out that apparently.
Yeah, you did it, and now it's directly in it.
It's covering you up on my screen, so I'll read it.
That's okay.
We can answer it, and then I'll close it. What do you think about marking first crack with a dip in inlet temperature? So yeah, I think it's possible, depending on the sensitivity of your probes and the design of your machine. Some machines, depending on airflow and things like that, you may or may not see the dip in as profound of a way. But random question, random answer, I will tell you something fun, and that is that you should be dynamically calling first crack every single time. I usually do it by smell. You can also, this smells like vinegar when first crack starts because the decomposition of sucrose sugar creates acetic acid as a byproduct, and so it smells like vinegar. And the reason you want to mark it dynamically is because whenever first crack happens, the distance between first crack to the end of the roast is going to determine your whole bean to ground color differential in terms of how roasted the inside is or how developed the inside is. So if you just say, well, first crack's always 200C or it's always this or whatever, then you're going to end up in a situation where you didn't call first crack appropriately because it wasn't 200C, and that means your differential between your whole bean and ground will be different, which means you could get an incorrect ground color. So
yeah, so
crack.
So on that, in a production environment where it's loud and maybe the bagging team has loud music on, and getting actual first crack marked based on sound or smell when you're running batch to batch to batch with the same coffees, is temperature a viable way to do that?
Probably not. Just because
okay.
Temperature is it's in a state of flux. It's a pretty good proxy for what's happening with the beans, but it's not necessarily always accurately reflecting what's happening with the beans. So, for example, there have been a couple roasts I've done on multiple different machines where, depending on how you're driving the roaster to the end bean temperature, you can get very, very different results. So like everything's fine up until first crack, and I do something different around first crack just to make this happen. Mm-hmm. And I can get a 7 degrees C temperature swing to the same color, which means I roast one way and I get to the color for my baseline. I roast another way where I'm a little bit slow in the early stages of first crack and have to ramp to end. And so I bring my burner up significantly, which increases the air temperature, which increases the air temperatures moving and filtering through the bean mass. And because the metal probe is more responsive to temperature uptake than the beans are, it absorbs that heat energy first and actually causes...
Okay, no, that makes sense. I wasn't necessarily thinking in the context of also like Loring's agitate the beans quite well in comparison to some other roasters where it's really resting down at the bottom. So that's
on other machines.
Yeah, okay.
On Loring, yeah. So, yeah. See, yeah.
Interesting.
Basically, you can only trust your bean probe as far as you can throw it. I'm just kidding. It's close enough to get you fairly because you can throw them pretty good distance, especially if you cut the wires. But yeah, I mean, they do a pretty good job of being accurate, assuming all conditions are the same. But when the conditions are significantly different, like you're running your burner way different or your airflow set way different, then you will probably get a different reading than you're accustomed to on your bean temperature. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this kind of gets into the realm of valuable insights from Mr. Who's. You're not traveling anymore.
Bullshitting. I'm sorry.
Huh?
I said we're just supposed to be bullshitting. I forgot.
No, this is,
There's
there we go. So that's where, like, I was just going to ask, like, I think I saw that you're doing online consulting now, and that's not something that I'm cynical about, but it's something where it's like, what does that look like as you, somebody who said like, okay, like I'm not tasting the coffee for me, I'm tasting it for you. Like, how are you communicating with customers in a remote way that makes it valuable for them? You know what I mean? Like,
that's
that insight on roasting is super good, and that's something that a roaster can take and trial with. But like, as a consultant, when you're working with them, how are you doing that remotely right now?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. So we've got on my website, there's like 30-minute meeting, 60-minute meeting where basically people can call in and discuss whatever. Usually I ask for like a little snippet about it so I can prepare my brain ahead of time for what we'll be talking about. And then there's also an option to do, they send me coffee, send me profiles, I taste it, tell me even about their water composition. I do my best to match it. I've got a reader here that I can use and mix in mineral content to try and get somewhere near where they are. Taste the coffee and then be able to give them feedback. I mean, sometimes people just want a gut check, like, hey, I'm tasting out here in a void and I don't get feedback from anybody. Am I even on the right path or not? And then sometimes people want more specific consulting, like, hey, I'm getting X flavor in my coffee and I need to get rid of it. How do I get rid of it? And so it's actually been pretty interesting kind of going through that process, because I've been able to help people as far away as Australia, which is almost literally on the other side of the world.
Feels like it when you get on the flight.
Yeah, especially when you're stuck in the 17 hours or whatever, right? And so I've been able to help people via distance consulting. And part of it too isn't just like you said about the salesman thing. It's about partly understanding what they're tasting, and then not just what they're tasting, but how I would describe what they're tasting and how I would associate those issues with the flavor, with the roast curve that they have, and then how do I help them troubleshoot that. Sometimes it's helping people understand how to drive their machines better. Like, oh, well, have you tried doing this with your airflow, or doing this with your burner, doing this with your charge temp, or something along those lines. So some of it can be very, very specific. Some of it's more general, and some of it's just people hoping to get a taste for a little bit of a gut check. Yeah. So, and then we're doing some online courses as well now where it's mostly lecture derived. And I am a big proponent of more mentorship style hands-on learning when it comes to roasting, because I feel like in some ways it's honestly better that way. But in this time period where people have potentially downtime, and I know that I have some downtime, I'm doing online courses to try and at least give people access to informations and a platform to ask questions. So far I've got one on profile roasting practices, I've got one on heat transfer, and I'm going to be posting one on Akawa use, and then one on the Aillio Bullet as well. So
very cool. Yeah, there was a question on that.
Yeah, so I'll be kind of doing all of those just as a way of trying to continue to give back to the community. And obviously the price is adjusted for the fact that they're online and the fact that it's a fucking pandemic right now and everybody's hurting. So I want to continue to be able to share information and make money for my family as well, but doing so within a reasonable context. So,
cool.
Yeah.
What is the cost?
So I'm doing most of the classes so far are 2 hours, and they're listed at $100, but I've got social distancing set as my discount code. And so you'll see on one of my posts, I put something about it. And so if you need, I think it's like social dash distancing. So it's all together. And that gets you 25% off. So it's $75 for a 2-hour course. With one of them has materials generated. The other one I'm still working on generating some materials for it. So there's some handouts and stuff like that. So
that's great.
Yeah, hoping it's interesting and valuable and fun. And if nothing else, a distraction for people. So
very cool. When are they?
I don't know. I will
Oh,
have to look at my calendar. I mean, they're in the next couple months.
okay, cool.
So yeah, just take a gander at my website. You'll see them.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's just exciting
Post
and
about coffee.
seems like a good platform for it.
Let's see, we got some. Should we look at other questions, or do you have other questions, or what should we do first? You're running the show, Devin.
Oh
Rein me
man,
in.
no, I'm just steering the boat. No, let's look at other questions. There were a couple of good ones in there that we missed that were kind of early on.
It says, what's Rob's view on airflow when it comes to light roasted coffee? I like airflow, and I like light roasted coffee. I think really airflow is the primary means in which heat is actually infiltrating the coffee anyway. Even the Provac guys have said for years that their roasters are about 70% convection and only about 30% conduction. And conduction is just a really poor means of heat transfer in terms of speed. And for coffee roasting, the innovation of using convective airflow during roasting helps speed up roasting time significantly historically. So I think airflow is a good thing, and I think airflow, especially higher airflow toward the end of the roast, can give you better control, because when you make a gas burner adjustment, it shows up in a more profound way because the burners have a harder time keeping up with the volume of airflow you're moving through. So for my light roast coffee, I typically am at very high airflows at the end of the roast. Depending on how fast I need to roast, I'll either leave it set stable or so the whole roast is a high airflow, or I'll use lower airflow at the beginning to concentrate heat into the drum and then crank it open about part of the way through. So
Nice.
Then we've got Dark Ritual said, how does the Aillio Bullet compare to larger gas-powered roasters? So I haven't done a Can You Taste the Roasting System challenge with the Aillio just yet. So in terms of can we get it to match perfectly, I would assume so, but we've not tried. It gives you a lot of control, and I've had a lot of fun playing on it. So I've used it to teach multiple SCA certification courses in Singapore when I've been working at Better Barista. I have one at home that I play around with and use pretty regularly. You've got drum speed, air speed, and burner control essentially, which is really nice, all in a pretty compact little package. Because there are plastic components and because it was designed more for home use, I wouldn't try and put it through production paces too much. So if you're doing moderate, like low level production on it, that's fine. If you're doing 5, 6, 7 batches a day, that's probably fine as long as you're emptying the chaff bucket regularly and giving it some downtime and keeping up with maintenance. But if you're like, I'm going to buy a 1 kilo roaster and production roast, just don't do that. Save yourself a lot of heartache. Buy like a 5 kilo at minimum. If you're going to be seriously trying to do any production, I would probably be looking at like a 15 kilo machine at minimum. But I think the Bullet's a great machine and high recommend for me at least. Chris said, we recently got a roaster with probes for exhaust and environmental temp tracking. Can you speak generally to the use of the relationship between those measurements and flavor profile? So air temp is dope because it gives you an insight into what's happening inside the machine. So when you're charging the roaster, you want to have goals for what temperatures those should be at generally, as well as in a range. So like exhaust air temperature is usually what I charge on, but I make sure my inlet air temperature is within a certain range so that I know that I'm dumping in at the right amount of heat energy. So those are going to be really important. It also gives you early warning signs because you'll notice your inlet air temperature change before you notice your exhaust temperature change, before you notice your bean temperature change. But you don't really notice your bean temperature change as much because the scale is big. So you'll notice your bean rate of rise change next. So you get this like cool early warning system. In terms of flavor, it's kind of heat application as well. Higher air temps mean higher heat application, which means you're roasting faster. And so similar things you would experience with fast roasts in terms of flavor change, you'll experience with higher air temps as well. So it's kind of hard to draw a direct correlation there. Do you believe first crack temp Between batch, always the same? No, definitely not. I think that the first crack temperature can change by a couple degrees every single time you roast it, even if it's back to back, just because of natural wiggle and thermocouples. And for those international, when I say wiggle, I actually mean just variation or deviation on temperature probe, not actually the wiggling movement, although if your probe is wiggling, that's also bad. There have been a couple times I've tried to learn jokes when I'm teaching internationally, and I forget that language is different, and I say a joke and everybody looks at me, which actually happens, frankly, during non-foreign travel as well. Basically, I have really shitty jokes that I enjoy, and y'all are just haters, and that's fine.
That was my favorite part of traveling with you in Australia and New Zealand, is that you made the same jokes in every presentation, and some nights it was just complete silence, and you'd sit around and be like, all right, not telling that joke again. And then literally in the next presentation, you'd make the same joke, and then it'd bomb again. You'd be like, all right, not making that joke again. So I'm beginning to think that they're for you.
Hopeless romantic. The jokes are for me, to be honest, not for anybody else. So, yeah.
Daniel says, which is your favorite coffee right now? Which one is the worst?
In the world?
I guess what's your the worst cup of coffee you've ever had?
The worst sip of coffee I've ever had?
Yeah.
Natural processed experiments that go wrong. People, when they're learning how to do naturals, sometimes accidentally do some weird stuff. Actually, that's not true. I've had a really bad phenol in the last year that just tasted like I was drinking a Sharpie marker.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly when, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you whose coffee it was because that'd be rude. In terms of Nossa's coffee, if you're putting me on the spot, my favorite coffee is probably a L'Armenier Hermosa right now, which is a really nice Guatemalan, and that's part of it's mental for me because I've had that relationship for almost 11 years now with Julio. My least favorite is not because it's poor quality, it's just because I don't like that dark roast, and that would be probably our French roast isn't my favorite because it's a little bit beyond. Now, that being said, our Italian roast, I can dig that, especially with a bagel and cream cheese in the morning. So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually find myself drinking a lot of dark roast because my wife doesn't drink light roast. Like, she just can't get into it. And we have a Seiko automatic espresso machine. So I just press the button in the morning before getting on my 7 a.m. conference calls with Austria. But working from home, each morning I grab a new coffee cup before going in to do the meeting. And I, this week, had the experience of grabbing the wrong coffee cup. And I grabbed one that had like just an inch left. And I think it was like 3-day-old French roast Pete's coffee had been sitting out. And it was the first time in a long time where I was just like, no, like, it's pretty.
You don't know how to use your dishwasher or sink?
Okay, we're all dealing with a mental health crisis right now. But do you know Cameron Heath?
Yeah.
So he works at Counterculture now, and he sent me this. I can't pronounce anything in Spanish correctly, but he sent me this coffee from Counterculture, and I cannot stop thinking about it. But oh, you can't see it because there's people's things in the way.
Well,
but
and the best part is it flips it backwards.
Valle del Santuario. It's from San Ignacio, Peru. And it was just fantastic. And also, like, we drink a lot of coffee in the office, and we get coffee from a lot of new roasters, and they're so awesome to share their coffee. And we're able to give them feedback, and everything's super good. But also, like, it's the coffee that people aren't sure about, or it's the first batch on a coffee, or honestly, like, I'm just working and I'm not thinking about the coffee. So being at home and having this coffee was like, this is nice because I can think about it and just relax. But yeah, so I think coffee is fun. It's just like I think it's the thing that draws us all to it. And then you realize like, oh, this is my job now. And you totally forget about it. And then every once in a while, you just have these perfect moments where it's like, yeah, the people, or, oh yeah, this coffee is amazing. And it just takes you back to why you got back into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we got more questions. Casa de Luca says, what do you think about a Kava roast profiles?
We got all kinds of questions. So I'm still looking in the queue of people typing. Are you looking at the actual questions, or do you have access?
You can see. I don't have access to all of those.
Oh, I have those. Well, I'll go through a few more comments. And what was the one you were reading?
I'm actually just going to say hi, Ron.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Ron.
Yeah, the San Ignacio is awesome. That Peruvian coffee.
Have you noticed a relationship between water activity and rate of rise, first crack, and finish temps? No, I mean, and Ron, you and I were talking about that like 3 years ago, I think. It's a long time ago. I still haven't gotten a water activity meter. I know that based on some of the stuff that Chris has been doing at Royal, he's been getting certain conclusions. Chris Kornman at Royal Coffee in an Oakland area. And then based on some of the stuff that Ian was doing with Cafe Imports, he was having different results with it in terms of understanding what it means for people that roast coffee. I know that I think it's Joel from Red Fox Merchants was telling me certain correlations that he's noticed between water activity and how beans react around first crack. I've never gotten a meter because of the expense of them, to be honest. And until I start to understand more firm things, I've just not taken that jump to play with it. So that one will just have to be a question for another day.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think in terms of getting water activity information, most roasters rely entirely on their importer. Like it's a good data point to have. And honestly, like if you want to know more about that question, like talk to your importer, get that reading before it comes in, and log it in your Cropster account. Like every green coffee or every sample has that field where you can enter it in. And then you're building this perfect data set where you can go back where it's like, oh, how did this coffee roast in comparison? Especially doing it within like an origin would be a good way to do it.
Although
Joel, yeah, go ahead.
Over time, that reading will become less and less valuable because water activity can have a tendency to change over the course of storage, depending on storage conditions. So when you first receive it, it's likely more accurate than later on down the road. So I would be careful drawing too many conclusions.
It's a good point. What was interesting when talking to Joel more a little bit on water activity, and water activity is like you can ask Chris Kornman who writes the blog post on it. It's like, yeah, like still not sure. Like there's key things like this is what we found, this is what we know, but it's like we'll see what we think in a year.
Yeah.
But like what Red Fox does is they have a range of water activity that they purchase within. And like that is a very clear way for them to go, this doesn't meet the quality of what we're looking for. Absolutely. So there's like general rules. There's like the nice, like, okay, cool. Like this informs a decision and it makes a decision for us. And other ones is more like, all right, let's figure out the true science behind it all. And that's where it gets a little bit into like coffee bro science. And you got to be careful with that.
Pops Roasted Coffee said, is there a target window for peak rate of rise? And the answer is, it depends on your machine. Every thermocouple on every machine is going to be different in terms of what the max rate of rise is and when it happens. So that's unfortunately one of those ones that's kind of backwards. Someone said they have a question about my roasting style. That's Rahasha Hasavar. If I butchered your name, I do apologize for that. Hopefully we'll find it later on. So if you ask it there, we'll see. Oh, here we go. Do you focus on development time or percentage? So for me, I am a time person, 100%. The amount of time after first crack happens is basically the amount of time the heat has had to penetrate the seed after the water has been removed. And the surface water is removed, but there's actually like a very, very clear demarcation line between the outside surface of the seed and the core of the seed when you're roasting, right before first crack. And when first crack happens, the water starts escaping rapidly, and the heat energy can then cause the chemical reactions to start happening from the outside in. And so if you roast a really fast roast and you have a 2-minute development time, it has a very different meaning than if you roast a very slow roast and have a 2-minute development time, because your percentages will be totally different in those two roasts. but the amount of time after the water's left that the heat has to cause changes inside is similar. So for me as a consultant and as a coffee roaster, time is a lot more informative of how much you've given it time to actually have the heat penetrate the seed and cause those chemical changes to happen. And that's my recommendation in terms of what you should measure. That being said, as long as you're within a certain range of like normal roasting styles, percentage works out okay, because you will necessarily fall in a similar range. But it's once you move into some of these extremes, or if you're doing like a very, very fast, as people joking, I don't think jokingly, as people say Nordic style roasting, right? If you're doing a very, very fast Nordic roasting versus like an old school American style light roast, 8 minutes versus 14 minutes, the percentages don't line up. So, and for my friends in the Nordic countries, I'll say this. They often object to people saying Nordic roasting is a certain way because there's multiple countries that are considered Nordic countries and they all have different roasting styles. And so it's kind of funny that we just say like Nordic roasting. It'd be like someone saying, oh, you roast like Americas, like in the Americas. And it's like, I've seen people in
which I've definitely heard.
Yeah.
I mean, like we definitely have a tendency to group people together and stereotype, and when you do that, you definitely lose the nuance of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But would you say color is the best way for like a QC process to evaluate that?
Yeah. When I first started consulting, I used to say like, you don't need a color meter, and I got a color meter, and my opinion could not have changed more. The color seems to be one of the biggest indicators of hitting your targets that you're going to have. Morton Munchau is pretty convinced that it's about 80% of people's impression of coffee is the color. So if you've hit your color targets in terms of your whole bean and ground color, then you're probably really, really close to tasting as you would expect. Followed by development time, followed by basically everything else. So if you don't have a color meter, it's really worth the investment. 1,000% worth the investment. There are some that are less expensive. Like, I mean, you could buy one for $20,000, or you could buy one for $3,000 or $2,000.
Yeah.
Usually the less expensive ones, you might have to do more sampling and then average it. But I mean, over time, maybe you could say you make the investment back on the more expensive one, but I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to smaller coffee shops who, because like when you test color, generally you test ground coffee, right? Like what would you say to smaller coffee shops that like struggle with that waste of doing that? Like what are some ways to creatively get around that?
Oh, in terms of like, well, coffee shops probably aren't measuring the color. This is more on the roaster.
Sorry, when I say coffee shop, I mean like coffee roasters, smaller coffee roasters. Let's say they're doing like 100 pounds a week or less. How do those people run QC?
Yeah, stuff like the Tonino, for example, it uses basically a portafilter, and so it'd be essentially like wasting a shot of coffee. So that uses a very small amount of coffee. The Lightails uses a very small amount as well. For your whole bean coffee, you could reincorporate it back into the batch as long as you're having clean sanitary practices and the color measurement fits within FSMA. You could measure multiple whole bean samples and add them back into the batch. When it comes to the ground, you obviously have to discard it. I would also recommend grinding it as fine as you can possibly grind it so you can see the best averaging of the color of the coffee. So the more fine the grind, the more it shows an average of the entire coffee. So even though a lot of people try and grind more like a cupping style, I found a lot of benefit from doing a really, really fine grind. So, and whatever you do with that, you could take those grinds, dump them into a cup, shake them around, dump them back in, measure it, dump them back out into the cup, shake it around, measure it, dump it. Yeah. So you could get 3 measurements using just that one amount of coffee. That'd be probably good. So.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then also, like, I feel like we should take the opportunity with 79 people in here. Like, if you're not currently cupping your coffee on a regular basis, that's the first thing that you should be doing. Like all these are super good things to talk about, but I mean, first you should be cupping, second you should be logging, and then reviewing what those cupping notes are in relation to it. Yeah. It's amazing how many people I meet who don't cup their coffees or even like do brew tests. Like I don't mean specifically like the SCA process, but just going through the process of tasting your coffee and evaluating the quality is so incredibly crucial.
And ultimately, and this is what Anne says all the time, right? Ultimately, we're in the business of flavor. And if it doesn't taste good, it doesn't taste good. Like you could have the most Instagrammable, picturesque, perfect roast profile, and you could have color numbers that you think work, and your weight loss seems like it works. But if it doesn't taste good, it doesn't taste good. So, yeah.
And like that one, so that's good.
Oh, Anne's on here?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Hi, Anne. All right. Let's keep doing some of these questions here. Someone says, what do you think about Akawa roast profiles? I have multiple Akawas, and I like them. So if I'm not misunderstanding the question, I think you can get really good results off an Akawa. So let's see. Having struggle roasting Brazil, typically 9 and 10 minutes for when we're hitting first crack. So hopefully that gives you some general idea. Have you had moments in your career where your passion for coffee has been subdued, diminished due to work environment? How have I retained that passion and found a way forward? I mean, I think all of us, it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
Right? When you're working with people that you find frustrating, it's going to make everything about your job frustrating, including like your experience with coffee. So, and there's some times where I go through a kick where, like, I don't know if you've ever had this, where there's like a month or so where coffee just doesn't taste good and you're on tea or something like that, or whiskey, as the case may be. I think that it's okay to feel those ways. And if you had to feel positive all the time, I think you're expecting way too much out of yourself. And it's a little bit unrealistic. So I would say, like, you just kind of got to roll with it and know that either the things that you love about coffee are outweighing the things that you don't like, and eventually you'll feel passionate for it again. And sometimes in my case, it's always been like, well, shit, this is all I've been doing for the last 14 years or whatever. So I don't really have much where else to go. So might as well keep trucking. But, I think remembering what excites you about it. And for me, a lot of it's the relationships, having relationships with farmers, having relationships with friends around the world that are involved in the coffee trade, and remembering those people and those relationships and those experiences. And sometimes even remembering like a delicious cup of coffee or something like that. But do you want to chime in on that, Devin?
Yeah, no, I like this question totally resonates with me. I have very few hobbies. Coffee was once a hobby and it turned into work, but also in a really weird way because I work at Cropster. So I'm not a coffee roaster, I'm not a barista, but I work with coffee every day. For me, I think it's most important, like self-care is like a really important part and that's just a symptom of not taking care of yourself, I think is a really good way to look at it, or at least for me personally in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I find that like when I'm losing interest in my hobbies or having issues with work or those things, like if I just take a minute to kind of look introspectively and go, okay, like what else is going on? Am I sleeping? Am I eating meals on the right time? Am I exercising? And if you're doing things like that and you're actually taking care of yourself, those things can become a little bit more enjoyable or a little bit less of a chore, which sounds like super cheesy and off topic, but like for me, like that's the most important way for me to be enjoying coffee and being intentional with it, instead of it being this chore where you're trying to like perform well and like get back to that spot. Cause it, I think it's like existentialism where they're like, is no you, you're just who you are now.
I think it only lets us do like an hour or something.
In exactly an hour.
So I've started it again. If you want to rejoin it, I will.
Yeah.
And then we'll just tell people, hey, sorry, resubmit your questions, because I bet those are gone. All right, I'm trying to find you. Request access here. There you go. Mr. Devin Connolly. Are you sure you don't want to do it on your Cropster one? Devin?
Yeah, I think I just hit the button to not save the video from the last one too, but we'll see in
That's
just a
fine.
sec.
I posted it. So
Okay, good, cool. So if you want to see the video, go to the Robus. We'll see
apparently
if there's a way
Instagram
to
Live
export it and put it
do
on Cropster.
about an hour. So that's
Yeah, it's fine.
So resubmit your questions because they were all gone. How do I manage such epic facial hair? That must be for you, Devin, because I do not manage it.
It can't be. Oh, this is freaking. I'm going to shame my mother. She sent me a photo of her with like an Instagram filter on. Let's see. It's not shaming my mother. It's just showing a picture. She basically sent me a photo of her with like a fake beard on and saying that she looks like me and you, which I think is pretty funny.
Never shame your mother, Devin.
It's not shaming my mother, but maybe she's watching right now.
Looks like a fucking lion. That's awesome. I love
it. It's been a long safer at home looking like you and Robin's. I don't know. I thought that was
everybody who's joining us now, make sure to resubmit your questions because they all disappeared when Instagram kicked us off. Let's see.
Cool. So, Rob, we got a few more minutes.
Yeah. Let's...
What, I guess for me, like, what are some, and this is something we didn't necessarily prep for, so if you don't have an answer, I'll be very disappointed in you. But what are some ways that people can be using, like whether, like, how are some ways that people can adapt right now to work well, like remotely? Like, what are you doing remotely in terms of using Cropster? What are, like, with cupping and with things like that? Like, how can people keep the gears moving in that process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the inventory management side is like super helpful because I'm not in the warehouse doing visual bag checks all the time. So I'm definitely having to rely more on that. Like I do obviously use it when I'm in the office, but I'm also a person that has to see things. I've worked visually for so long that to go out and actually see the stacks of coffee helps me to understand our flow through a little bit better. But working remote, having all my inventory stuff on there has been super helpful. We've still been communicating about our pass fails in terms of our Roast Ranger reports. Roast Ranger for me is the illest, might be iller than the Iliad, because we are able to set up exactly what metrics matter to us and get reports on how many pass fails we have, so I know how many coffees I want my team to evaluate that's there at the facility doing production to see if it should still go out or not. Thankfully, they've been doing really, really well.
Good.
I'm going to be using my cupping app a lot here at the house. I will say I love the cupping app with the SCA spec on iPad. It is really, really pretty much perfect because it's just SCA score forms laid out. And part of the reason we're doing that is one of our cooperatives we buy from, their cupper lives out of country, and so he had to flee from Guatemala before they shut the border.
Oh, wow.
And so none of the cooperative coffee really got scored in the way it should have, and so they don't know how to make their community blends. So I'm getting over 30, maybe over 40 samples delivered to my house soon, and I'm going to be cupping and scoring for them just because I care about them and want to make sure that they're doing well. So I'm going to be spending like all of next week sample roasting like a madman on my Akawa and cupping coffees at home using Cropster Cup to log all that stuff. And I brought all my devices home. So I've got my graduated cylinders for density measurement. I've got a Sinar Bean Pro for moisture content measurement. So we're going to be still evaluating everything and trucking just along like normal, but I've basically cleared space for myself in the garage and installed a small vent. Actually, I was distracted during our first call because delivery person showed up with my 400 CFM fan from Amazon. So I'll be using that to ventilate while I'm roasting. So yeah, so that's kind of how I'm going to be using Cropster going forward and doing it even remotely. So, yeah.
Super cool. Just a couple quick things. Cropster will be putting out some webinars soon, just in terms of like how to adapt right now in using your Cropster account, like getting more value out of it. A lot of us are at home right now, so we have the kind of that urge to like clean the house or to do those things, and we're going to be posting ways where you could be kind of cleaning your Cropster account up so that it can give you more value into the future. We'll also be doing more Instagram live sessions like this one. So we'll be checking in with other um, people who have valuable information for people in the industry. So thanks for doing this, Rob. Yeah, and also like we have our sales team, like Cropster service isn't going to be interrupted. We have an awesome staff and really great customers who are doing like, we're all partners in this, which is awesome. But also we are available. So if anybody wants to check in and get a training and you have time that's available, like we still have our full sales staff. So we're happy to check in, do training, anything that's personalized and checking in, we can do that as well. But yeah, I technically have to run to a meeting.
Yep. And I have to run to family. So,
cool.
Yeah. But I will say there's a lot of specific roasting questions trickling in. I am available if anybody has these questions. Sorry I couldn't get to them today. If you go to my website, host.coffee, we can schedule online conversations or phone calls. So it's not host.coffee.com, just host.coffee. Or if you want more specific training, there's ways that we can interact. So if you just go to the schedule portion on my website, you can hopefully get those questions answered and schedule some time with me remotely. And if not, I hope to see you all whenever this thing clears out and we're able to all meet up at trade shows and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming, and see you on the next one of these.
Yeah. Stay safe. Take care of your loved ones. Bye.
All right. See ya.